the energies deify the humanity. So that model of deification of Christ's humanity is the model for the individual believer, the individual baptized Christian, as they participate in God through the church, through the sacraments, and that participation is a real participation, but it's a participation in the uncreated glory and uncreated light, uncreated grace of God, not a created grace. So I would contrast this with what's later dogmatized, so not just theoretically or philosophically speculated upon in Aquinas in terms of how there might be a relationship between this absolutely simple essence and created beings, or this absolutely simple essence and the one person of the Trinity somehow becoming incarnate. Rather, it is the question of the Roman dogmas, and the Roman dogmas do eventually state, and I think I'm vindicated by this, not just in my reading of what's at the Roman councils, particularly like Trent or Vatican I, where dogmatic divine simplicity is stated pretty clearly. You also have the outworkings of this in terms of created grace. You know, Trent has, if I recall, going from memory, a condemnation of different speculations about what kind of grace and justification is actually given in baptism. And one of the things that's condemned is the idea that it's not created grace. So in other words, the grace that is stamped upon our soul, the sanctifying grace, is a created effect. And of course, this is again in that sort of Aristotelian causal format of God, the cause, and then we receive the effects of that cause. But the effects that we receive are in fact created. And I would argue that the reason that Rome has this issue is precisely because eventually in the dogma, the uncreated grace, essence, energy, distinction doctrine was eventually lost. So it was perfectly fine in terms of up into the 6th, 7th, 8th council, if you count the 8th, our 8th, that is, where it was stated explicitly. But it eventually, I would say, after the rise of Frankish dominance, Charlemagne, the Carolinians, you eventually have this dogma kind of being lost and forgotten, and Roman Catholic theology pretty much settles into a pretty ossified, solidified doctrine of what divine simplicity is. So there are a lot of errors. I'm going to close up here with this opening statement. I think that's the main point. We would say that there's a lot of errors that kind of flow out of this that you can tease out. And so my first clarification is that I'm not debating whether Thomas had good intentions. I'm not debating whether Thomas in other places in the Summa said things correctly. I'm not here to debate Augustine's intentions or Anselm's intentions, but rather just specifically whether or not the things that are stated, say, in Book 1 of Summa Theologica and in Book 1 of the Summa Contra Gentiles about what divine simplicity is, if that actually makes sense with and comports with what is stated elsewhere about how there is a real distinction of persons. Because to us, it doesn't seem that there could be a real distinction of persons if distinction implies composition or division. In fact, that's a direct borrowing from Plotinus. It's Plotinus who first said, following other Greek philosophers before him, that all consideration of distinction implies division or composition. And for us, we see that as many times refuted, particularly in the Christological heresies, but also in the triadological formations of the early church. So for us, all of these questions are linked. The doctrine of God, how he relates to creation, also the doctrine of Christology, the doctrine of the sacraments, and the doctrine of eschatology are all intimately connected, and ecclesiology, in terms of how we view the essence energy distinction and whether we believe that it's possible or not. So when it comes to Aquinas's conclusions, I'll say that for my later critique, given the fact that, for example, I don't see how creation can be a free action of God if we accept his doctrine of divine simplicity and the idea that all the actions of God are absolutely isomorphically identical to the essence of God. I don't see how we can say that there's a real incarnation if God is an absolutely simple essence, or, for example, how we would avoid patripassianism if God is an absolutely simple essence. In other words, that one hypostasis of the Trinity couldn't enter into a mode of being that the others do not. So, for example, the Father is not crucified. The Father does not become incarnate. It's only the Son. But if God is an absolutely simple essence in which the the distinctions imply composition or division, it becomes difficult to see how there is a real incarnation, how